Before the bombs, before the bunkers, before the Blitz, gramophones played in quiet Berlin parlours. This was a war fought just 10 years after the Treaty of Versailles had tried to stop all wars, and already the world was back in flames. A conflict of tanks and totalitarianism, but also radio waves and rhythm. This was 30 years before we put a man on the moon, and just 12 years before the first rock and roll single. A modern world was forming, but dragging all of its ghosts behind it. Music has always reflected the spirit of its age, and the Second World War, it echoed across every airwave, dance hall, and battlefield. From Nazi propaganda waltzes to jazz played secretly in Warsaw ghettos, from Edith Piaf's Smoky Laments to Vera Lynn singing Hope into the Rubble, World War II also had a soundtrack. And it wasn't background music. It was politics, it was identity, it was resistance. The interwar years were an uneasy symphony. In Berlin, jazz raged through the cabaret scene, rebellious, black, American. The Weimar Republic embraced this modernism, while the far right condemned it as decadent. Hitler once said, "Jazz is the music of racial degeneration." Instead, he idolized Richard Wagner, whose operas were grand, nationalistic, mythic. Before major speeches, Hitler often listened to Lohengrin, using its dramatic swells to stir his emotions. He called Wagner the most German of all Germans. Hitler's personal record collection discovered in his bunker after the war included Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, both banned under his own racial purity laws. Meanwhile, in Britain, Churchill was moved by the music of Elgar and Mozart. He would often request classical records while drafting wartime speeches late into the night. Across the Atlantic, swing was king. The big band era had begun. Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, music for a generation dancing at the edge of uncertainty. When war came in 1939, music wasn't sidelined, it was weaponized. In Germany, the Reichsmusikkammer, the Reich Music Chamber, controlled every public note. Jazz, banned. Jewish composers, forbidden. Modernist dissonance, declared degenerate. Instead, martial marches and folk songs like Erika and Lili Marlene filled the airwaves, glorifying discipline and rural purity. Lili Marlene, originally a cabaret love song, became so popular with both Axis and Allied troops that the BBC began broadcasting an English version. Rommel's Afrika Korps and British tank crews were humming the same tune in the same desert. In Britain, the BBC curated morale carefully. Songs had to strike a delicate balance, not too grim, not too flippant. In the US, President Roosevelt embraced upbeat big band music to stoke national optimism. Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy by the Andrews Sisters was cheeky, catchy, and unmistakably patriotic from 1941. Music didn't stay behind, it went to war. American GIs carried jazz into Europe. British folk singers sang folk ballads around campfires. Soviet troops marched to orchestral anthems, even while retreating. In the Pacific, US troops tuned into Bing Crosby during island assaults. Submarines on Guadalcanal received specially pressed vinyls in field kits. One soldier called it a lifeline, like getting mail from home. German generals favoured grand marches, but regular soldiers often sang homesick songs of snow and survival. One of the most common funerary pieces was Ich hatte einen Kameraden, a slow, aching farewell. Even amidst fighting, music transcended battle lines. On Christmas Eve 1942 in Tunisia, British and German units could hear each other singing carols in the dark. Japan entered World War II with the world's second largest music market, but like Germany, quickly censored it. Jazz was suppressed. In its place, the government promoted gunka, patriotic military songs meant to instill loyalty. Still, Western melodies never vanished. Ryukoka, a fusion of Japanese folk and Western ballads, survived underground. In 1943, jazz saxophones were banned. Musicians relabeled them as bamboo flutes to perform without arrest. Kamikaze pilots reportedly listened to sentimental enka songs, often about family or home, just before taking off. Meanwhile, American broadcasts in the Pacific used jazz and swing as sonic warfare, beaming Glenn Miller into enemy territory. What did people actually hear during the war? For soldiers, harmonicas were as common as rations. US foxholes played Louis Armstrong or the Ink Spots. German outposts swapped guitar ballads and Wagner. Civilians lived by their radios. Londoners would have been listening to Vera Lynn. Muscovites heard folk choirs and Soviet anthems. Tokyoites heard Ryukoka quietly. World leaders had their own tastes. We know that Hitler idolized Wagner. Churchill relaxed to Mozart and Anglican hymns. Stalin, on the other side, loved folk songs, especially those which glorified himself, of course. Roosevelt enjoyed Broadway, using show tunes at campaign events. In fact, Mussolini played violin on air in the 30s, but by wartime, Italian broadcasts only featured military marches. Back home, music was ration joy. Vera Lynn became the force's sweetheart, her voice floating across the seas to every corner of the conflict. We'll Meet You Again was more than a song, it was a prayer. In America, stars helped sell war bonds with music. Films like Yankee Doodle Dandy fused patriotism and song. Radios were the real weapons of morale. 1944, 90% of UK homes had one. Germany distributed cheap Volksempfänger radios, rigged to only receive Nazi broadcasts. In fact, many German families secretly modified these radios to tune into the BBC jazz broadcasts, risking prison or even worse. While the Allies and Axis stole the spotlight, music was being made in every corner of this war-torn world. In India, Bollywood songs like Do Hato Aduniya Walo carried hints of defiance under colonial censorship. In Brazil, samba became both an escape and a national voice for them. In South Africa, Solomon Linda recorded Mbube, which would later morph into The Lion Sleeps Tonight. In China, resistance songs used traditional scales to rally against Japanese occupation. Mbube was recorded in 1939, the same year Germany invaded Poland, a song from Johannesburg, Shantytown, and it echoed worldwide. World War II claimed millions and reshaped the lives of countless musicians themselves. Tony Bennett fought in Germany. However, some didn't survive. We know that Hungarian composer Laszlo Wiener was murdered in a Nazi labour camp. Glenn Miller vanished over the English Channel in 1944. One theory suggests that Allied bombers may have accidentally downed his aircraft while dumping unused bombs. The war ended in 1945, but music didn't reset. It evolved. The electronics boom created miniaturized amps and circuits, leading directly to the electric guitar. Les Paul, experimenting with pickups during the war, would release the definitive guitar model in 1952. Music became raw, wounded, political. From chanson réaliste to bebop to early rock, pain was now a part of the rhythm. World War II didn't just change borders, it changed how we heard the world. World War II was fought with tanks and torpedoes, but also with trumpets, voices, and violins. Music didn't just survive the war, it remembered it. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it sing.